Harekrishna. So we welcome all devotees today, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam. It's not the 21st yet, so we can't technically speaking sing. But hopefully by Krishna's mercy, maybe by next week things will open up a bit more. But today we're going to read a very nice verse from Srimad Bhagavatam 3:7-39. And what we will do is I'll just offer the prayers, and you can follow them if you want, but you don't have to sing them. We'll just continue with it. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswati vyasam tato jayamudiraye. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayana, unto Nara Narayana Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. Nasta Prayeshu Abhadreshu, Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, Bhagavati Uttama Shloke, Bhakti Bhavati Naishiti. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an devotee. Jayantara Srimad Bhagavatam. So today we read from the 3rd canto. We are on the 7th chapter, and I think the verse is 39. Yes. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Nimittani cha tasyeha proktani anaga suravi swato jnanam kuta pumsam bhakti vairagyam evava. Nimittani cha tasyeha proktani anaga suravi swato jnanam kuta pumsam bhakti vairagyam evava. Nimittani cha tasyeha proktani anaga suravi swato jnanam kuta pumsam bhakti vairagyam evava. Please repeat the synonyms. Nimittani, the source of knowledge. Cha, also. Tasya, of such knowledge. Iha, in this world. Proktani, mentioned. Another, spotless. Suravi, by devotees. Swataha, self-sufficient. Jnanam, knowledge. Kutaha, how. Pumsam, of the living entity. Bhakti, devotion service. Vairagyam, detachment. Eva, certainly. Va, also. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Spotless devotees of the Lord have mentioned the source of such knowledge. How could one have knowledge of devotional service and detachment without the help of such devotees? Spotless devotees of the Lord have mentioned the source of such knowledge. How could one have knowledge of devotional service and detachment without the help of such devotees? Please hear the purport. There are many inexperienced persons who advocate self-realization without the help of a spiritual master. They decry the necessity of the spiritual master and try themselves to take his place by propagating the theory that a spiritual master is not necessary. Srimad Bhagavatam, however, does not approve this viewpoint. Even the great transcendental scholar Vyasadeva had need of a spiritual master. And under the instructions of the spiritual master, Narada, he prepared this sublime literature, Srimad Bhagavatam. Even Lord Chaitanya, although he is Krishna himself, accepted a spiritual master. Even Lord Krishna accepted a spiritual master, Sandeepanamani. in order to be enlightened. And all the acharyas and saints of the world had spiritual masters. In Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna accepted Lord Krishna as his spiritual master, although there was no necessity of such a formal declaration. So, in all cases, there is no question about the necessity of accepting a spiritual master. The only stipulation is that the spiritual master should be bona fide. The spiritual master must be in the proper chain of disciplined succession called the parampara system. Suris are great scholars, but they may not always be anaga or spotless. The anaga suri is one who is a pure devotee of the Lord. Those who are not pure devotees of the Lord, or who want to be on an equal level with Him, are not anaga suri. Pure devotees have prepared many works of knowledge on the basis of authorized scriptures. Srila Rupa Goswami and his assistants, under the instructions of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, have all written various literatures for the guidance of prospective devotees. And anyone who is very serious about raising himself to the standard of a pure devotee of the Lord must take advantage of these literatures. Jai Gita Srimad ki Om Ajnanati Mirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Shakshuru Nittam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruvaya. In this verse, you'll find that a very central feature of today's class and Prabhupada's purport is the important point about the importance of spiritual master and the importance of how we relate to advanced and great devotees of the Lord. This is a very important point because it actually comes in between Vidura speaking to Maitreya. And if you realize the whole chapter is about further inquiries, isn't it, by Vidura. Vidura accepted Maitreya as his spiritual master. Let us not forget that. And therefore, what was his relationship with his spiritual master? Vidura's relationship with his spiritual master was that he was sincerely inquiring about the process of devotional service. This is very important. The verse before, you will find Vidura was asking questions to Maitreya. And in this verse also, Vidura continues to ask questions to Maitreya. And these asking of questions were not done in a challenging way. They were done in a very humble, submissive way. It's one thing to ask questions, but it's another thing to follow the answers that you have been given. Very often people ask questions. Sometimes, people shock when they ask for questions. They ask 10 devotees the same question, and then they pick an answer that suits them best. So this is not about submissive inquiries. This is about finding the answer that they want to hear, or the answer that suits their situation, without regard to being submissive. So actually, inquiries are very important in devotional service. But if the inquiries are asked in a submissive manner, then they become very potent. In, I think, the first canto, 3rd chapter, I think it should be the 39th verse, 1-3-39. We should understand the basis of such inquiries. There, very nicely, Shukadeva Goswami chants, Devakinandan bhagavantam yadva sudeve akila lokanate kurvanti sarvadmakam bhavam nayatra bhuya parivarta ugraha. The translation is very nice. Shukadeva Goswami says that only by making that inquiry, such inquiries, in this world, can one become successful and one become perfectly cognizant. That means conscious. Conscious of what? Conscious of our true position in life in relationship to Krishna. Why? Because these inquiries, they invoke what we call transcendental ecstatic love for Krishna. Until we really inquire about our true nature and position and the reason for our suffering, it is very hard to evoke any love for Krishna. But Bhagavatam tells us that if we start making these inquiries, Krishna from within will incite transcendental ecstatic love for him. And these inquiries are the way to become guaranteed of what we call the 10% immunity from the cycle of birth and death. So this is a very important point that we should remember. That is why you realize the whole of Bhagavatam is simply about inquiries. Nothing else actually. But all the inquiries that were asked, please do not forget, all the devotees who asked these inquiries, after asking them, they acted on them. This is very important. They actually acted on them. They did not just ask and then just leave it up. They did not ask.
You can take off the mask. You can take off the mask, Prabhu.
But I can't. I think you still have to wear it.
Raghunanan Prabhu says that you can take it off.
Really, Prabhu? No issues, huh? I don't want liability for the society. How is that possible?
Because there are listening in the mask behind the
Really? Thank you very much. I didn't realize that. Okay. Thank you, Prabhu. So this is very important point. Because very often we are in a situation where we ask questions. So it seems as if we are ready to submit. But then when it comes to acting on what answers have been given, we refuse to act on them. We do what we want. So this is very important point. So the whole focus of this question this time was actually the necessity, Vidura is asking, about the necessity of accepting a spiritual master. This is the point here. Srila Prabhupada wonderfully explains this whole nature of accepting the spiritual master very beautifully in the purport. Prabhupada says that self-realization actually is the goal of life. And we all know, we all understand that now. We understand that the whole goal of life is actually to become realized about who we are. But then we should not forget, Prabhus and Mataji's, that self-realization without ourselves being in relation to our relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead is not complete realization. Why is this important? Because if we only think of who we are and we don't realize where we have come from, then we will only concentrate on one half of the puzzle, that we are spirit souls. But where we have come from and who is the origin of us, that becomes very important. That is why even in material world you have surnames. If someone asks you what's your name, you may say something. But then they will ask you what is your family name. Why is the family name so important? Because it shows your link to where you have come from, your origin. So if someone denounces and says, I don't use my family name because I don't want to be associated with my family, then imagine the same spiritual position that you have. I am so and so, I am spirit soul, but I have no connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the difference between devotees and demons. Demons never want to be connected to Krishna, but devotees always want to be connected to Krishna. So self-realization is the starting point. And I think in Bhagavatam, I think it should be 126 or 127, Savai Pumsam Paro Dharmo, Yator Bhakti Rado Saje, Ahaituki Aprati Hata, Yayatma Suprasipati. This is the goal of life. That we may have so many different dharmas, we may have so many engagements and occupations, but we should know that there is only one Paro Dharma, and that is Yator Bhakti Rado Saje. It means that we should always render devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the meaning of self-realization. So this is one thing that we must be very clear about. So it is very clear that bhakti that is actually rendered to Krishna is the goal of life. But Vidura raises this point in the question, and Srila Prabhupada confirms that if you want knowledge of devotional service, if you want detachment from this material world, then it is not achievable on your own actions. This is a very important point. It's not achievable by your own actions. So no matter how much we try on our own endeavor, our own speculations, our own reading of Bhagavatam, our own efforts, it is actually not going to bring us the real fruit of the knowledge of devotional service. And Bhagavatam tells us we will never be detached from this material world also. Sometimes even as devotees, we try very hard on our own to become detached from material nature. But without the blessings and help of the spiritual master, Prabhupada uses the phrase in the purport, without the help of the spiritual master, one cannot make advancement in devotional service. So Srila Prabhupada emphatically states in the purport that Srimad Bhagavatam does not approve of this viewpoint. What is the viewpoint? That we do not need a spiritual master. Prabhupada is very clear. In fact, not only Srimad Bhagavatam, all literatures and all sastras, they all insist on the absolute necessity of a spiritual master. Don't forget, the most important scripture that we have, Bhagavad Gita itself, in 434 Bhagavad Gita, Krishna makes it very, very clear to Arjuna. Tad vidhi pranipatena, pariprashnena sevaya, upadekshantite jnanam, jnananas tattva darshinaha. Very important. It's it's the seminal verse of Bhagavad Gita actually. Because Krishna tells Arjuna, "Oh Arjuna, you please learn the truth. Try to learn the truth. But how you learn it? You have to approach a spiritual master." Now, after approaching spiritual master, what should we do? Prabhupada very often warned us that having a guru is not like having a pet, or it's in fashion, Oh, everybody in iskcon is having one guru, so I must have a guru. It's not, it's not like, oh, it's a checklist. I must have a guru, I must have this, I must have that. Now everything is okay. No. When we approach a spiritual master, two things must happen. We must inquire from him submissively. This is very important point. We must inquire in what manner? Submissively. And we should render devotion, we should render service unto him. And that service should be with devotion. Why are these two things important? Because until we render service to the spiritual master, we will not be humble. We will always have a level of false prestige that we know better. But when we sincerely turn to Krishna, that is when we actually grow. That's why in the purport of 434, these 2 or 3 points are very important for us to understand the approach to the spiritual master. Prabhupada writes, in the purport of 434, that mental speculation and dry arguments cannot lead one to the right path. So we can do a lot of mental jugglery about Bhagavatam, we can discuss it, but without the help and blessing of spiritual master, we will not know the true import of Bhagavatam. That's first thing to understand. The second thing Prabhupada writes in the purport, even if you do independent study of the scriptures, you do independent study of the books of knowledge, then even you cannot progress in spiritual life. For a while you may catch something here and there, but you will reach a plateau stage, it's very difficult. Then Prabhupada writes, you should accept a spiritual master in full surrender. And we must serve the spiritual master like a menial servant. Menial servant. Why is that important? Because when we assume the mood of a menial servant, then that false prestige, which is the most difficult barrier between us and having taste for Krishna consciousness, that false prestige will go. Only when we start having the mood of serving devotees, then not just spiritual master but devotees, then only our false prestige will go. But the problem is, everything we do is very self-serving. Even when we think we are serving devotees, actually we are serving our senses. Because subtly what we do is, we want to serve devotees according to what we think is service. But we forget that the most important thing is whether that devotee will be pleased by our service. Prabhupada, at one time had asked one of his disciples, please bring me water. So the disciple went in the kitchen and he thought, why should I just give Prabhupada water? I should give him a bit of lemon juice, which we had freshly squeezed in the morning. That would definitely, be better. So he brought lemon juice. Prabhupada was speaking to some people. After he left, Prabhupada looked at it and said, what is this? And the disciple said, this is lemon. Prabhupada said, I asked for water. And the disciple said, no, I thought actually lemon would be nicer for you. And Prabhupada said, if the spiritual master asks for water, you just give him water. You don't give him anything else. Because this idea that you think you know better than the devotee you're serving, or the spiritual master you're serving, that is a symptom of our false prestige. And that is why we are battling with our minds. That is why our minds are giving us so much trouble. We are chanting. We are doing so many things externally, but we are still so disturbed. Because this mood of false prestige, it is blocking our service to the spiritual master. So this is a very important point actually. So that is the first point that Shastras tell us. From Bhagavad Gita itself, 434 is very clear. Another thing nicely that has been given in Bhagavatam about the necessity of a spiritual master is in Prahlad Maharaj's famous prayers. In the 7th canto, 9th chapter, Prahlad Maharaj has 2 prayers that we should all learn. The first prayer is in the 24th verse, and the second prayer is in the 28th verse. We'll look at the one in 28th, because that purport and the verse is very important. In 7, 9, 28, very nicely Prahlad Maharaj sings, Evam janam nipaditam prabhavahi kupe kama vikamam anuya prapatan prasangha krikvatmasat surashina bhagavan grahitaha soham katam nu visaje tava britya seva. The translation is very nice. Remember, this is the point where Nrsimhadev has actually conquered Hiranyakashipu, and therefore Prahlad Maharaj is the rightful heir to the whole kingdom of Hiranyakashipu. In other words, Prabhupada writes somewhere in that purport that actually the whole estate of Hiranyakashipu, Prahlad Maharaj was going to be the beneficiary. Even though he had brothers, he was actually the most exalted of them, so he would be the real beneficiary. But in this verse, so nicely, what is his prayer to Krishna? Or what is his prayer to Nrsimhadev? He says, he admits, and this is how we accept spiritual masters. We should accept our position is fallen. Not in a very theoretical and falsely humble way, but genuinely. He says that because of my association with material desires, one after the other, this is the reason why we are always disturbed. Because we always run after the material desires, and we take association of each of these desires. This is not sadhu sangha, this is asat sangha. So we run after one desire after the other, Prahlad Maharaj says. And the result is, I gradually fell into the blind well, which are full of snakes. Andhadupam. We fall into a well, not knowing we have fallen into the well. And I just followed everybody else who does not want to accept a spiritual master. But now Prahlad Maharaj says, your servant Narada Muni kindly accepted me as his disciple. See, Narada Muni actually initiated Prahlad Maharaj into bhakti. That is the meaning of initiation. Not simply a ceremony where the spiritual master is giving you beads. You take the beads and then do whatever you want. That is not spiritual life. Or you take the beads and commit Vaishnava aparad and hurt the devotees and create chaos. That is not what the spiritual master wants. But that is a formality. But see Prahlad Maharaj. Was Prahlad Maharaj's name changed in the initiating process? No. But he followed every instruction that Narada Muni gave in Bhagavatam. Which is more important? The formality or the essence? The essence very often we miss. But the formality we are very, very attached to. So Prahlad Maharaj said, Narada Muni saved me. And he is the one who instructed me how to achieve this transcendental position. And so Prahlad Maharaj tells Nrsimhadev, my first duty is to serve him. How could I leave his service? This is the most important point. That if we really want to grow in devotional service, we should remember very clearly that we cannot offer direct service to Krishna. If you look at the purport of 7928, you will find Prabhupada says very clearly that no one should be anxious to offer direct service to Krishna. No. Why? Because our mood is that of Mahaprabhu. Gopi Bhartuhu Padakamalayo Das Anudas Anudas. The process to approach Krishna is that the first service and the last service and in between service must always be rendered to the spiritual master. Only by his mercy can we approach the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is very important point. So the secret of success, Prabhupada says in the purport, is that first one should try to please the spiritual master. Then one should attempt to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. not the other way around. You see? And Prabhupada says very clearly, one should not attempt to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead by concoction. In other words, before you perform any action, Prabhus and Matatis, please consult your spiritual master. If you cannot consult your spiritual master, you must consult the Siksha Gurus, your seniors. You cannot perform an action without any authority. Under whose authority do you perform an action as a devotee? Is the question you must ask. Did you check with the devotee? If you say, I chanted and Krishna spoke to me in my heart, then I will give you evidence from Bhagavatam how Prabhupada tells us that you should not do. I'll give it to you in a while. Because that is the single most dangerous thing a devotee can do in devotional service. To think that you are so pure that the super soul is speaking in your heart and you are guided by the super soul to do whatever you want, and you wreak havoc in the lives of devotees and you disturb the living entities. That is why every single episode of Bhagavatam, you will find that no devotee ever did anything without consulting the devotee. Vidura is so exalted, but he is consulting anyway. Uddhava is so exalted, but Uddhava was consulting Krishna because he was the supreme spiritual master for him. Arjuna was Nitya Siddha, but he was consulting Krishna. See, there is nobody in Bhagavatam who does not consult and be guided. So this very important point Prabhupada says, one must first be prepared to serve the spiritual master. And when one is qualified, he is automatically offered the platform of direct service to Krishna. If Prahlad Maharaj himself says he is not ready to do direct service to Krishna, then who are we? Who are we? So we should be very careful about this point. So the first point I told you was 434 of Bhagavad Gita. The second point I wanted to share with you all is 7.9.28, which we just spoke about. That's a very important verse. The third point of the principle of necessity of accepting spiritual master and spiritual guidance comes in Shukadeva Goswami's very powerful verse in the second canto, 3rd chapter, 23rd verse. Or 23rd. This is one of the very powerful and strong verses that acharyas like to quote. Jivan chavo bhagavatam priyenum najatu martyo vilabheta yastu Sri Vishnu padhya manujastulasya swasanchavo yastu naveda gandham. And this verse Prabhupada likes very much. In the purport, in the translation, Shukadeva Goswami is telling, a person who has at any point of time not received the dust of the lotus feet of the Lord's pure, the dust of the feet of the Lord's pure devotees upon his head, he is certainly a dead body. Very powerful, isn't it? He is certainly a dead body. So that means, if we are not ready to take the dust of the lotus feet, right, of the Vaishnavas and the feet of the pure devotee, if we don't put it on our head, then Bhagavatam tells us that we may look like we are walking around and we are alive, but factually speaking, we are dead. If you read the purport, Prabhupada says a very nice point. Prabhupada says that one should first love the dog of the beloved before one shows any loving sentiments for the beloved. This is a very nice point. Prabhupada was writing this purport because he observed it in the US. He said in the US, when people want to show somebody they love them, they love their dogs first. You know, you strike a conversation with someone because you two are passing by and you have dogs. And then you talk about, oh, I love your dog and you love my dog. And then we go on to extend our love to the person or the owner. And Prabhupada used that to show us that in Vaishnava culture, we are nothing but dogs at the lotus feet of our masters. And therefore, Prabhupada says that if you really want to show love for Krishna, then show it to the servants of Krishna. By showing it to the servants of Krishna, by serving them, right? Sincerely serving. You see the two words, I think they're there. By sincerely serving a pure devotee of the Lord. It's SS, you know. Sincere service. Not service which is motivated. This is a very important point actually. And Prabhupada writes in that purport, the first condition of devotional service to the Lord is therefore to be a servant of a pure devotee. Very important point. Now, in this verse, Prabhupada actually quotes a verse from King Rahugana, which also talks about the importance of spiritual master. I remember when I first started asking my spiritual master about the importance of serving devotees, he referred me to this verse. It's very easy to remember because it's 5, 12, 12. And in this verse, you'll understand the point very nicely. Prabhu Ganaita tapasa nayati nache jayamir vapanar grahava na chandashanaiva chalagni surye vina mahatpad rajo vishekam. When you have time, you should read this verse in the actual 5th canto. But the translation is very nice. It is spoken by Jadabharat. You all know Jadabharat, isn't it? Before that he was a deer, and before that he was the great Bharat Maharaj. For some reason he left the whole world but got attached to the deer. And Prabhupada writes in the purport, actually Prabhupada doesn't have purport. Bharat Maharaj became a deer because he forgot Krishna and he became attached to a deer. Then after that he became the great Jadabharat, very exalted personality, who then started advising King Rahugana. And in 5.12.12, he's talking to King Rahugana. He's telling him about devotional service. In fact, Rahugana is accepting Jadabharat as his spiritual master. Now, at that point of time, Jadabharat gives him very nice advice, and this is the verse. He says, the perfectional stage of devotional service, which is known as the Paramahamsa stage of life, you cannot attain it, my king, unless you are blessed by the dust of the feet of great devotees. And correct me if I'm wrong, all of you can see the purport. Does Prabhupada write the dust of the lotus feet, or no, the dust of the feet of great devotees in italics? He does, right? I think it's in italics, because in my bhagavatam it is in italics actually. You see it there, just in the purport. I'm not looking at the purport of 5.12.12, I'm looking at the purport of 2.3.23. There he quotes 5.12.12. And there he italicizes that important line. And that tells us why Prabhupada is saying, King Rahugana is being told by Jadabharat that you cannot attain the lotus feet, the dust of the feet of pure devotees. You cannot attain perfection of devotional service just by tapasya. You know, some people become very, very caught up as devotees in austerity. And they do nice ekadashi, they wake up for Mangalarati, but it increases subtly their false prestige. There is no spiritual master in the picture, but they do lots of austerities. They are not taking the dust of the feet of the pure devotees, but they have austerities. But it's not enough. Rahugana says, even if you master the Vedic worshipping process, you still cannot attain the perfection stage of devotional service. Even if you accept sannyas order of life, even if you discharge perfectly householder life, even if you chant Vedic hymns very nicely, even if you stay under the hot sun or cold water or before blazing fire, if you do not serve the pure devotees, then you are not going to have taste for devotional service. This is a very important point. If you ever have time, go to the actual verse of 5.12.12. No, not 5.12.12. Maybe a few lines down or a few verses down. There, Prabhupada writes a very important point. Prabhupada writes that King Bharat Maharaj, the reason why he actually took up devotional service but became attached to the deer and in that sense fell down is because he did not consult a spiritual master. Prabhupada uses the word, he did not consult a spiritual master. So we must consult devotees. Radhanath Maharaj spoke on the necessity of spiritual master in one lecture. And there, he says something very interesting. He says there that sometimes, we may think, how do we get the dust of the lotus feet of the pure devotee? My spiritual master may be 10,000 miles away. Or, Radhanath Maharaj writes, my spiritual master may have left this world maybe 14 years ago, 11 years ago. So when we speak of the dust of his lotus feet, what do we mean? And Radharnath said very nicely, we are speaking of the humble approach to serve his instructions. The humble approach to serve his instructions as compared to serving our mind. That is what it means. So rolling in some dust, and not serving Krishna, and not following the instructions of the spiritual master, and not following the instructions and consulting devotees, it is of no value. We think we are doing devotional service, but our minds will remain disturbed. So this is a very important point for us to remember. So, we have now learned 434 Bhagavad Gita. We have looked at Prahlad Maharaj's prayer of 7.9.28. We also looked at this most wonderful verse of Shukadev Goswami of 2.3.23. And within 2.3.23, Prabhupada then directed us to 5.12.12. And there we learned that serving spiritual master is the essence. And serving him means actually rolling in the dust of his lotus. That is what it actually means. And the other point that's really important is a very important purport from the first canto, 5th chapter, 23rd verse. 1.5.23 of Srimad Bhagavatam. There, Prabhupada is speaking about Narada Muni. And you all know Narada Muni was a young boy. He's speaking of his life previously when he was a young boy. His mother was just a maid servant. She was not very exalted, but she had one great quality. She was always serving the Vaishnavas. Menial service, no false prestige. And these great Bhakti Vedantas, what did they do? They came to stay in the house where she was serving. And in the house where she was serving, she served them and she engaged the boy in serving them. And Narada Muni was actually serving them. And Prabhupada writes in the purport that from Narada Muni's birth, his previous birth, it is very clear that the service of the Lord begins with the service of the Lord's bona fide servants. Prabhupada says, the Lord says that the service of his servants is greater than his personal service. And there's one statement, of Prabhupada in the purport that really strikes you. Prabhupada says, by the service of a bona fide spiritual master, what happens? The Lord consents to reveal himself in proportion to the service rendered. This is a very important point for those analogies. You cannot get Krishna to reveal himself in your heart, in the bliss of devotional service until he consents. He must consent. In this world, everything is consensual, isn't it? I agree, you agree, then we can talk. Mediation is consensual. That's why when someone doesn't agree to mediate, you fight it in court, because in court nothing is consensual. But in devotional service, we don't fight because hopefully we consent. But not often that's the case also, isn't it? So consent is very important. But how does Krishna consent? Prabhupada writes in this purport, Krishna consents when you serve the bona fide spiritual master. Then you get Krishna's consent. He gets it for you. You don't have to do it. And in proportion to the service that you render to the Guru or the spiritual master, to that extent, you get the consent of the Lord to reveal himself. So no one can tell you, that, I'm just doing my own devotional service, I don't consult with devotees, I don't hear devotees, I have a spiritual master, but I just, took initiation, but I'm chanting very hard and Krishna is revealing everything in my mind, in my heart. Prabhupada says that is sahajya. Please remember that. There is no spiritual basis to that. So the point from all these verses that we are trying to tell is what Vidura is asking Maitreya, Prabhupada is affirming in the purport. That the spiritual master does not only mean Diksha Guru. You will realize that in all these instances in spiritual life in Bhagavatam, no one actually achieved what we call a formal declaration of initiation. But they were all strong Siksha Gurus. And Prabhupada has said in many, many parts of Bhagavatam and in Sastras that factually speaking, there is no difference between Siksha and Diksha. But there must be surrender. Why did Prabhupada make Diksha a part of our process in spiritual life? Because as he writes in the beginning part of his purport for this verse today, very often we don't want to surrender to a spiritual master because we want to actually occupy that post ourselves. We like to be in charge, and we don't like others to be in charge. If you have a problem with control, devotional service is going to be very difficult. If you think that you can control everything and control people also, you'll find you're fighting a losing battle. Especially in devotional service. In material service, you do very well. That's why the demons prosper, they do very well. But in spiritual life, if you think you can control everything, then you're really in difficulty. You'll find the symptoms of those who try to control everything was that they became frustrated. Because they forget that Krishna is in control. And the only person who can reveal that to you is when you surrender to the spiritual master. That's why those who sincerely surrender to the spiritual master, whether Siksha or Diksha, and when they follow that person or person's instructions, you find the symptom of these people is that they accept the hand of Krishna in everything. They don't become disturbed, you see. So this is very important. And that is why you'll find, for example, Narada Muni and Vyasadeva were two very good examples of disciple and spiritual master. Prabhupada quotes them in the verse here, in the purport. Even though Vyas Bhagavan is actually the spiritual master of all spiritual masters, isn't it? Guru Purnima is actually based on the whole idea of remembering Vyas Bhagavan as the original Guru. But original Guru also has original Guru. And that original Guru was Narada Muni. And Narada Muni's Guru was Brahma. And Brahma's Guru was Krishna. See? And Krishna himself was Guru. So, where did you go and say, no, I don't need spiritual? Supreme Personality of Godhead took initiation. Then we are saying, no, actually I don't need that. I'm fine. And even after taking initiation, if you say, I'm initiated. But if you're not following instruction, how can you consider yourself initiated? How can we consider ourselves initiated if we are not following instruction? This is very, very, very important. Common sense, and this is not extraordinary sense or extra common sense, but common sense will tell us that we cannot justify direct service to Krishna by bypassing the Guru. The whole point of Diksha Guru is very nicely given. That is why we need to be accountable to someone. If we just do whatever we want, that is not correct. We need always to be accountable to someone. We must find someone whom we are accountable to. And that person must be a person who is elevated in consciousness, who can inspire us in Krishna consciousness. Not that we pick and choose, this instruction I like, that instruction I don't like. 4 executive principles are there, 3.5 I'll do. Sometimes 2 I will do, sometimes 2.4 I will do, And we think no one can check us. So this is not correct actually. So please remember, it is very, very clear in Bhagavad Gita and Bhagavatam that when we talk about the spiritual master, we are not only talking about your initiated spiritual master, we are also talking about the senior devotees who are sitting next to you. Very, very important. Be guided by them and follow them. In 10.10.25 of Srimad Bhagavatam, this point is very nicely stated. The context is very interesting. You all know the Damodar Leela, isn't it? I don't have to tell you Damodar Leela. You remember the second part of Damodar Leela is where Manigriva and Nalakuvera, the 2 boys of, what's his name? Kuver. They became very inebriated and they appeared naked without any clothes in front of Narada Muni. And Narada Muni became very, very compassionate to them. And what did he do? He appeared to curse them. He actually prayed to the Lord that even though they become trees, that somehow or another he wanted and he desired that Krishna bestow mercy on both of them. And so many, many, many years later after that incident, when they were 2 Yamal Arjuna trees in the courtyard of Krishna, Krishna did not forget the desire of his pure devotee. And so he fulfilled that desire by transforming them out of their existence as trees and liberating them so that they elevated their consciousness. Why I say 10.10.25 is important is because of what Krishna says in that verse. It gives us the idea of what it means is a spiritual master. Not just someone who's giving you a spiritual name. Because here, Krishna tells us why he actually gives mercy. And he's talking to the two boys, Devarishi me priyatamo, yad imao dhanadhaut majao, tat tatha sadhya ishyami, yad gitam tan mahatmana. He is actually describing Nardamuni. And he says in the translation, these two young men, they are sons of the rich Kubera. And what does Krishna say? Shocking, I have nothing to do with them. You would think that Krishna has everything to do with everyone, right? Because everyone came from Krishna. But Krishna says, I have nothing to do with them. Why? Because as fathers, sometimes you can be upset, when sons and daughters don't listen to you. Then what do you tell them? You say, okay, fine, you want to do whatever you want to do, you do it. I have nothing to do with you. That's how Krishna says. But then Krishna says, Devarishi Narada is very dear to me, Priyatamo. He's very dear to me. He's a very affectionate devotee. See, this is the mood of a devotee. Devotee is always affectionate. Devotees never mean ill to anyone. Devotees are always very loving by nature. We always pray for everyone. And therefore, because he wanted me to come face to face with them, I must do so for their deliverance. This is very, very, very important. So this proves to us in Bhagavatam that actually Narada became the spiritual master for these two boys. Without even them realizing it, his prayer became their shelter. His desire that they come to Krishna was the reason why they got Krishna. They may have thought that, someone's cursed and somehow Krishna saved us. But Krishna saved them because a spiritual master prayed for them. So when a devotee prays for us, and if that devotee is exalted, Krishna is bound. Even if he doesn't like this person, he will still say, okay, what to do? I have to just follow him. He will do it. So please do not think that a formal declaration means a guarantee to Krishna. No, it is your behavior and combined with the mercy of the devotee that actually gives us the chance to go back to Krishna. This is a very important point actually. Prabhupada now says in the verse, I think we have discussed more than enough points about the absolute necessity for a spiritual master. It's very hard, to go against these points because they are all sanskrit actually. Now Prabhupada, we're focusing on one point. Prabhupada talks about this point that inexperienced persons, right at the start of the purport, he says they deny the necessity of the spiritual master. Why? Because actually they want to be spiritual masters. This is an important point. And that is why when we have false prestige, we cannot submit ourselves to a devotee of the Lord. We cannot surrender. And there is the danger actually. So this is a very important point. So sometimes people will say that, why should I surrender to someone? Krishna is in my heart. I will just follow him and he is the original Chaitya Guru. I don't need anyone else. This point is refuted by Srila Prabhupada in the seminal purport of 297 of Srimad Bhagavatam. Very important. In 297 of Srimad Bhagavatam, Brahmaji has sat down. And if you remember, he was trying to find out his origin in the lotus flower. He could not. And then when he sat down disturbed, he heard the voice saying, ta, pa, ta, pa, ta, pa. And so Brahmaji then sat down and he started following that voice. Prabhupada writes there that when we are initiated by a proper spiritual master in a chain of succession, then we must engage in the discharge of tapasya. In this case, Brahmaji was actually initiated by Krishna. But what does Prabhupada write after that? One should not, however, think himself on the level of Brahma to be initiated directly by the Lord from inside. Because in the present age, no one can be accepted as pure as Brahma. So it's very clear there. We cannot expect to be treated like Brahmaji directly. I think Prabhupada, is very clear because he knew in Kali Yuga we will use this very advanced argument to say, I'll just, do that because I am very qualified. Some people say Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj stood in front of the picture of his Guru and then he just took sannyas. That's Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj. He's pure devotee, Simha Guru. If you think you want to compare yourself to him, good luck to you. That's a very dangerous comparison to make. So please be guided by the strong purpose of Prabhupada. We need someone to check us. We need someone we are accountable to. It's very, very important. Very, very, very important. Now, towards the last point we want to state is this point where now Prabhupada spends the rest of the purport giving us wonderful, numerous examples of all the great devotees who were guided by spiritual masters. They were all guided by spiritual masters. We just spoke about Vyasadeva and Narada, isn't it? Vyasadeva was most exalted, but when he became disturbed after compiling the Vedas, Itihasas, all the other Puranas, he kept asking in himself, in his heart, why am I being disturbed? And as he was praying and seeking guidance, Narada, his spiritual master, came. And he also confirmed and said, why are you looking very disturbed? It must be because you have not glorified Krishna and Srimad Bhagavatam. Why is this exchange between Narada and Vyasa important? Because Vyasa Bhagavan accepted in his heart that he was a servant of the spiritual master Narada. Narada immediately could understand the cause of his despondency and he could give him the right aushadam, medicine. This is an example of how a sincere disciple who prays to the spiritual master in his heart, who does not think himself very exalted, the spiritual master immediately reciprocates and gives the answer. And you will find the query of the disciple and the conclusion of the spiritual master are completely aligned. Completely aligned. This is the example Prabhupada gives us. First example. Second example Prabhupada gives us is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. You know, it's very important when you study Chaitanya Leela to understand one point. Up to the point Chaitanya Mahaprabhu accepted initiation from Ishwar Puri, if you read Chaitanya Leela very carefully, you realize something. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did not display symptoms of love of Godhead so much in his earlier part of his life. In earlier part of his life, his mood was Nimai Pandit, the great scholar. He defeated many people by jugglery and by eloquent, erudite scholarship. Sometimes he would become a source of bane and disturbance to so many people because they were so afraid. Nimai Pandit is so smart, he'll just defeat us in any argument. Isn't it? That's why they sent Nimai Pandit, Kesh, you know, who was it? Kesh? Yeah. He was also defeated at that point in time. So he was very powerful. But then you will realize in Chaitanya Leela that when his father had left the world and Nimai Pandit went with his friends to Gaya, and there he stood at the beautiful temple where Lord Vishnu's footprints are, and he was offering all the obeisances and Shraddha ceremony for his father. There he became very grave and he became very sincere. And then at that point of time, Ishwar Puri, he also came to that particular temple. When Ishwar Puri came before Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Chaitanya Leela tells us that they embraced each other with tears of love. It was at this point of time that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu accepted Ishwar Puri. Because after the Lord embraced Ishwar Puri, he then fell at Ishwar Puri's feet. He fell at his feet and he humbled himself before Ishwar Puri. Just imagine that. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's ecstatic devotion, even though he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he saved that ecstatic symptoms of devotion and did not display it for 60 years. He only displayed it after he took initiation from his spiritual master. He did that to show us that not even the Lord can learn to love God until we humble ourselves before Krishna and the devotees and the spiritual master. That is the instruction of Sastras. There's a very nice cooking episode I remember in Chaitanya Leela. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu invited Ishwar Puri, just after that ceremony was done, invited him to the house he was staying and said, "My dear Ishwar Puri, I would like to cook for you some sumptuous prasadam." And at that point of time, he made it very nicely and he put it there for him. And when he put it there for him, he said, "No, now I want to give you some prasadam, please take it." But Ishwar Puri said, "No, actually I should not take it. Because at the end of the day, I am not qualified to take this food." But then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, you are my worshipable Lord. Therefore, you should actually take it. And then at that point in time, Ishwar Puri said, my Lord, you are the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You are my Lord and you are my life. How can I take that? And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu countered and said, no, I am your humble servant. Ishwar Puri countered it and said, okay, fine. Divide it in half and we will both take it. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu countered and said, no. How can I take it in the presence of my Gurudev? I will cook again after you have taken. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as Nimai Pandit at that point, began lovingly serving Ishwar Puri until Ishwar Puri ate to his satisfaction. In fact, when he was serving his Gurudev in such a beautiful way, the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi Devi herself felt, this is too much. Because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Lord, right? She said, I cannot take it that the Lord must serve Ishwar Puri without him taking. So you know what she did? Unknown to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as he was serving his Guru, the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi Devi, came into the kitchen. And there she secretly made a full variety of food for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. I remember when I was reading this as part of some conversation, and I brought it up to my Guru Maharaj. Maharaj told me one very important point. He said, when you serve the spiritual master, the whole world is ready to serve you. And it is not because you wanted that service, but because the spiritual master is so pleased that the whole world is ready to serve those who please the devotees and the spiritual master. This is a very important point. And this is shown here. And that's why, if we have even an ounce of false prestige before gurus and our sikshas and our dikshas, we are actually blocking ourselves from that opportunity to actually understand the supreme absolute truth. We ourselves are blocking ourselves. Nobody else. We ourselves are blocking ourselves. So this is a very important point. And finally, after giving him that nice prasadam, then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu turned to Ishwar Puri and said, my dear Ishwar Puri, please accept me as your humble and unworthy and lowly servant. Please accept me as your disciple. And Ishwar Puri said, no, I am not qualified to accept you. But Mahaprabhu insisted. And then Ishwar Puri prayed in his heart and said, because you are insisting that I must do this, then I will do it in the mood of service, not in the mood of instruction. I will do it in the mood of service. So, a spiritual master's first qualification is that he sees initiating or guiding a disciple as only a service. He does not see it as a right. In fact, he sees himself as the servant of the servant of the servant. This is the mood of a spiritual master. And so Ishwar Puri accepted it. And later, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went to this place known as Kumarahata. That is the place of the birthplace of Ishwar Puri. And when he went there, what did he do? He rolled in the dust, And then everyone thought he was a madman. But he picked up the dust and said, I'm rolling in this dust because this is the dust of the birthplace of my Guru Maharaj. This is the mood. Now, in the lecture that Radhanath Maharaj speaks, he also quotes this pastime. And that's where he quotes what I told you just now. He says, now what does it mean to roll in the dust of your Gurudev's birthplace? Your Gurudev could be 10,000 miles away or could have left this world. Is it just a sentimental thing? I took the dust from here, I took water from there, I took this, I took that. And then Radhanath Maharaj points out, this is the real dust. If you really want dust from the spiritual master, then you please become humble. And you approach him in such a way that you serve his instructions. That is rolling in the dust. This is such a nice point actually. Ultimately, we are defined as disciples by the menial service and the level of instructions and surrender that we have. Third person, Krishna himself. Prabhupada brings up the next example, right? Krishna himself. Krishna submitted himself to Sandipani Muni. And if you remember when he and Sudama were classmates, they both went out on the order of their spiritual master to collect firewood. And because they wanted to get the best firewood, even though, they went out very far away, it became dark and it was going to rain, and it rained eventually, and they were in so much difficulty, but they took shelter of each other while remembering that they were discharging the order of their spiritual master. When they came back and Sandipani Muni found them the next day, he was so pleased with Krishna and Sudama as his disciples that he told them that I grant you the benediction that you will be famous personalities in all the three worlds. You'll be so famous. And actually Sastra tells us that is why Krishna is famous. Krishna is not famous because of his Aishwarya of being very famous. He's actually famous because he got the blessings of his spiritual master. And that's how he became famous. You will find, that sincere disciples of spiritual master, even if they don't want fame, fame will follow them. Look at Madhavendra Puri. Madhavendra Puri just desired to find some sweet rice and he wanted to taste it. Then he felt bad and then he went to sleep. Gopinath stole the pot and gave it to him, but told that to the priest in the dream. And by the time he got the sweet rice and he tasted it, he knew now I was in trouble because the whole village will come to know. In those days, they didn't have what do you have this WhatsApp and everything else. They didn't have that, but word spread very quickly, very very quickly. If you remember, when Parikshit Maharaj sat down by the banks of the Ganges, the whole three worlds of the sages and saints outside even they all came. And Prabhupada writes in the purport, what kind of network of communication was going on at that time? They didn't need internet, no Wi-Fi, nothing. Because Krishna was guiding them. So same way here, this point is very important. The point here to be understood is that the fame and name of a devotee follows him because he has pleased Krishna, not because he wants it. And so Krishna became very famous. And because Sudama was always connected to Krishna, today Sudama is also very famous. Isn't he? He's very famous actually. We always remember Krishna and Sudama with Sandiman. So that's the third example Krishna gives. Prabhupada gives. The next example Prabhupada gives is Arjuna accepted Krishna. And Prabhupada writes there very nicely, without any need for formal declaration. Even though Arjuna was a soul surrendered, he didn't need a formal declaration. But he showed the world that when friendship becomes the basis of discussion between two persons, sometimes the mood of being humble can be lost. So Arjuna knew his place. So as devotees, we should know our place also. When we become very familiar with each other, it breeds contempt. But when we respect each other as servants of the servants of the servants, that is actually the basis of true love. It's very important. Because otherwise we will criticize and we will judge each other. So Arjuna knew, and he was guided. And that's why he was ready immediately, to surrender to Krishna. And that is that famous Kartana Dosha verse, isn't it? Where he spoke very clearly about the fact that I've lost my composure, I've lost my confidence. I am now a soul surrendered to you. You please instruct me. You see? So sometimes we look at each other and we think, he doesn't know much. My devotion service is better. But we should be ready to learn from everyone in a humble fashion in devotion service. That is how we will progress. Not the one person who says, I will only listen to my Diksha Guru and all of you are just speaking to me. That is very dangerous. Because Diksha Guru is 10,000 miles away. And you think you can do anything you want. And treat the devotees in any way you want. Without realizing that Jagannath sees it and the pure devotee knows it. This is the problem. So these are all the nice ways in which Krishna, Prabhupada is showing us the necessity of accepting a spiritual master. And he ends very nicely by saying that we should always be prepared to accept a spiritual master as long as the spiritual master is within what we call parampara. This is a very important point. The spiritual master must always be in parampara. Because if we are not in parampara, then glorification of Krishna has no value. It will just be concoction. What is that famous verse? Nivrittatashe upagiyamana bhavau shurachotra mano virama ka uttama shloka gunadvada pumad virajeta vina pasukna. 10.1.4 of Srimad Bhagavatam. One of the very, very important verses. Shukadeva Goswami says, glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is performed in the parampara system. Glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is performed in the parampara system. That is, it is conveyed from spiritual master to disciple. Right? I think that's the translation. Maharaj made us learn this over and over and over and over. So it's there. It is conveyed from spiritual master to disciple. That is the potency in which we can glorify Krishna. And when we are in parampara, this glorification is very relishable. It is bhava aushada. It is the supreme medicine. I think it is stated there, it's the right medicine. It's the right medicine for the conditioned soul. So we want devotional service, but it has to be done in the proper way. So, in conclusion, one thing that's very important we should realize is that we cannot approach Krishna just on our own. But one thing I will also share with you, which is very important, is that while many of us may be initiated, many of us may not be initiated, we must always remember one thing, that in Krishna's eyes, all devotees are very, very valuable and precious to him. Please remember that. Mahaprabhu's definition of a Vaishnava is very broad. And the greatest impediment in growing in devotional service is when you offend devotees. Vaishnava aparad is a mad elephant offense. You know, you put an elephant in a China shop, a shop filled with China, not country China, but you know, those nice vases and everything. You try putting an elephant there, even you try putting human beings there who are like elephants, they will bang everything. What to speak of elephant here? Or in the other ways, of course, the elephant offense is also a mad elephant running through the forest. They will uproot all the trees and they cause havoc. So when we are performing devotional service and we think, as long as I'm very nice to my spiritual master, I can do whatever I want with devotees, we are in trouble. Because if you understand the offenses, if you are chanting the 10 offenses every day, you realize the first offense is to devotees. The third offense is to disobey the orders of the spiritual master. This is not accidental. Huh? That is why we always get caught. Because in front of spiritual master, we are all very, very well behaved. Oh, Guru Maharaj this, Guru Maharaj that, Guru Maharaj this, Guru Maharaj that. But the moment we finish with Guru Maharaj and we walk around with devotees, we find ways to criticize him. And I want to end by sharing with you in Antyalila 8th chapter a very frightening episode, which I think is a good way to end. Sometimes we should end with some fright, I mean, ecstasy is very nice, but sometimes in devotional service there should be some fright, at least. Some, bit of wake-up call is needed. Ramchandra Puri was one of the disciples of Madhavendra Puri. He was the godbrother of Ishwar Puri and Jagadananda Puri and Paramananda Puri. These were all exalted associates of Mahaprabhu. And Ramchandra Puri is a very good example of how we take up devotional service, appear to be devotees, but finally destroy our spiritual life. Even though we have accepted the spiritual master. Why? Because we forget the concept of Siksha and Diksha. We forget that everyone can be our spiritual master because everyone is actually a better devotee than us. And we should learn from them. This is a very important point. So one time, Ramchandra Puri was sitting down with Paramananda Puri and Jagadananda Puri and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came. This was, by the way, in Puri also, Jagannath Puri. And there, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu offered obeisances because they were all older to him. And because Ishwar Puri was the godbrother of Ramachandra Puri, so it's like his spiritual master uncle, like that. So he offered obeisances to him. And there was a large quantity of Mahaprasadam that came back from Jagannath, from the temple. So Ramchandra Puri first ate, and he ate very sumptuously. Then he began finding fault with Jagadananda. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had left. How did he do that? He finished his meal, Ramchandra Puri. Then he told Jagadananda Puri, please sit down. Then he took prasadam and he gave. Now, Jagadananda Puri did not eat much. But then there was so much Mahaprasad, Ramchandra Puri said, no, you must take more. It is Mahaprasad. Take. So he fed him so much. Eat it. You must finish it. The moment he finished it, after encouraging him to eat it, Then Ramchandra Puri started criticizing him. He then started speaking very openly after he washed his hands and mouth. He said, I have heard that all followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu always eat more than is necessary. So not only did he shoot Jagadananda Pandit, he also shot Chaitanya Mahaprabhu indirectly. So he said, all followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, I heard, that they always eat more than is necessary. And today I have directly seen it for myself. I've seen it. So Prabhupada translates, in Chaitanya Leela, the characteristic of Ramchandra Puri was, he would first be very nice to someone. He would be very sweet to that person. Then he would induce that person to eat more and more and more. I don't know, his specialty was this area really. Then after eating more than necessary, then he would criticize it. I hope you haven't met anyone like that. Where they're very nice to you, very good to you, at the end they will use that against you. You know how dangerous that is? And Chaitanya Leela is showing that. Because why? In material world, knowledge is power, isn't it? You think you know something about a person. You know something about a person. You keep it, and one day you use it. That's what Ramchandra Puri was doing. So he used that. And so he dared to criticize Jagadananda Pandit. But Jagadananda Pandit accepted it. He said, yeah, I think I ate too much. And he left. Now in the Antya-lila, it is stated how Ramchandra Puri also criticized his own spiritual master Madhavendra Puri. When Madhavendra Puri was about to leave this world, he was remembering Krishna in separation. Oh Krishna, where are you? Oh Krishna, where are you? And Ishwar Puri was serving Madhavendra Puri. But Ramchandra Puri came up to him and said, don't you know that Krishna is everywhere? How can you be saying that, where is Krishna, where is Krishna? And Madhavendra Puri said, I'm at the tail end of my life. I want to go remembering Krishna. You please leave now. I don't want to hear this from you. And so Ramchandra left. But Prabhupada writes a very important thing there. Ramchandra Prabhu was denounced by his spiritual master for his criticisms. But due to his offense, he gradually developed material desires. So Prabhupada says there, a symptom of you losing your devotional service and not serving spiritual master and devotees nicely, you will know it when material desires creep into your heart. Hankerings creep into your heart. You couch it in the name of devotional service, but name, fame, adoration, all these things, they are the product of not serving the Vaishnavas. And so now Ramchandra Puri was not content criticizing Jagadananda Pandit. What he did was, Chaitanya Leela said, he concerned himself about gathering all sorts of information about each devotee. So each devotee had a dossier, how they sit, what they do, and then he would find fault. And listen to this. He had the biggest file for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And what did he do? He concerned himself about how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was situated. He wanted to know what was his regulative principles. He wanted to know what did he eat for lunch. He wanted to know when he slept. He wanted to know his movements. Can you imagine that? It's very dangerous. Because Ramchandra Puri was interested only in finding fault, Prabhupada writes he could not find the transcendental qualities of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This is a very important statement. Translate that to us. If we are only interested in finding faults in devotees, we will never see their transcendental qualities. We won't. But he could not find any fault in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Is it surprising? He could not find anything. He could not find it. So how? At last he found one. You know how he found it? One day he went to the house where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had just taken a meal and he saw many ants moving around. And when he saw the ants, he said, aha! Ants are wandering around because some sugar candy must have been here. Sugar candy must have been here because overeating is there. These renounced sannyasis claim themselves to be renounced, but actually attached to sense gratification. Prabhupada writes in the purport, ants crawl everywhere. Whether there is sweet, sour, salty, Prabhupada says ants crawl everywhere. But Ramchandra Puri imagined the fault of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And this is a disease for us. Very often there is no fault in someone, but we imagine fault also. Because of this offensive, non-surrendered mentality. We are not following the Vaishnavas, we don't want to hear Vaishnavas, we want to not be guided by Vaishnavas, so we think we are spiritual masters. So when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu heard this, he felt, oh, actually he's right, I think I'm eating too much. See how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu reacted to the criticism. He didn't counter-criticize. He accepted it. So what did he do? He told Govinda, his associate, from tomorrow, only accept 1/4 of the pot of the Lord's prasadam. And only 5 kilos of vegetables. This is all reduced very much. Very much reduced. When the devotees heard that, they felt like thunderbolt had hit them. They were so upset actually. They were so upset. I remember my Guru Maharaj reading this. Someone told this. Maharaj said that, I think they were also upset because they were thinking now we also have to eat a little bit less. But they were very upset because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. How could Ramchandra Puri find this? But Mahaprabhu refused to budge. And when Ramchandra Puri met Chaitanya Mahaprabhu again and heard that he had reduced, you know what Ramchandra Puri said? He said, that's very good that you are trying to reduce your food, but this is all dry renunciation. So this way cannot, that way cannot. In other words, if one is not surrendered to the spiritual master, if one doesn't want to be guided by him, one will find fault with everyone and everything, even the Supreme Lord. Jai Mantraj Srimad Bhagavatam. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki. Jai Srila Gurudev ki.